There's a Cole Porter song. It goes, when the little blue bird, who has never said a word, starts to tune to the moon up above, is nature, that is all, simply telling us to fall in love. That's why birds do it, mice do it, even educated frogs searching for spice do it. Midshipmen fish in the intertidal zone do it, and crickets and thickets tired of sitting alone do it. The song is talking about reproductive isolation, the role that acoustic traits, the song evolution plays in guiding mate choice decisions. And thus the question is, what factors influence the rates of song evolution, the rates of premating reproductive isolation based on voice, and this variety of taxa that uses acoustic signals to guide mate choice. And one factor that's been considered to be important is the capacity some clades have to learn their songs. It's typically talked about in the context of the songbird radiation. These Austrian songbirds, most of the passerine songbirds that you see around Austin or North America, things like wrens, warblers, orioles, it's an extraordinarily diverse radiation, almost half of all extant birds. And these birds, as you can see, they learn their songs. The sister group are the sub-Austrians. So things like antbirds, flycatchers, and furnarids, but live mostly in South America. And they have an innate song. They require there's no learning mechanism whatsoever in most of the species studied, at least. And there's far fewer sub-Austrians out there. And for a long time, people have hypothesized that one factor that explains this diversity disparity, at least in part, is the capacity that Austrians have to learn their songs. In a hypothesis testing framework, you'd say the null hypothesis is simply that song learning does not influence evolutionary rates of premating reproductive isolation based on voice. Alternative is that it does. And most attention has been paid, as I just said, to the possibility that learning song leads to faster rates of song evolution, faster premating reproductive isolation based on voice. So this has been looked at in a theoretical context with population genetic models. In a variety of configurations, the inclusion of song learning speeds up the evolution of premating RIs in these models. This has theoretical support. There's also recent comparative analyses that show that when you break songs down to acoustic traits, so I'm thinking of things like frequency or number of notes, that the song learning groups have faster rates of evolution, faster rates of divergence in these acoustic traits compared to co-distributed sub-Austrians, the innate song clade. And that's some work done by my colleague Nick Mason at Cornell. There is, of course, another possibility, which is that clades with innate song actually have faster rates of premating reproductive isolation based on voice. This has been comparatively less investigated, but I think there's some interesting case studies looking at antbirds, these sub-Austrians with innate song, that suggest that they might have very fine song discrimination abilities, that even relatively small deviations in song might be sufficient for them, that might be premating reproductive isolation, but again, not much work on that. So the question that we addressed in this study was, how does song learning influence evolution of premating reproductive isolation in allopatry in neotropical birds? So again, Austrian songbirds, the learners, sub-Austrians, the innate song. In allopatry, because we know that allopatric speciation predominates in birds. And from the onset, yes, this is a kind of an n=1 comparison, but it's still been discussed a lot in the literature. And our motivation, one motivation for this was a very cool classic study by Coyne and Orr looking at prezygotic isolation in Drosophila in allopatric taxa in a comparative context. So they were able to get around a dozen pairs of these related Drosophila populations. They can actually put them together in the lab and really measure, what happens when we put them together. Again, they're allopatric, where they actually live. You can bring them to the lab and measure their premating, their prezygotic isolation. We can't really do the same for birds, at least not easily. But this was one motivating study that we were trying to follow. What we could do instead is simulate secondary contact by doing song playback experiments and measure song discrimination, which is a proxy for premating reproductive isolation. And we could do this on a much bigger scale, looking at many comparisons of closely related but allopatric populations. So we did this for 87 taxon pairs of neotropical passerines found in Costa Rica, 52 of which were Austrian songbirds, the learners, 35 sub-Austrians, the non-learners. This field work required a lot of field work, and was supported by funding from the AOU, the NSF, and it really wouldn't be possible without the large number of ornithologists and amateur birders that really get high-quality song recordings and place them in online collections. So we use these for our song playback experiments. I want to walk you through what the data looks like for one particular taxon pair. This is a sister species pair of antbirds, sub-Austrians, innate song, where one species is found in Central America and Northwest and South America, the spotted antbird, and its sister species is found in the Amazon, the spot-backed antbird. So what we would do is go through the forest in Costa Rica, find territories of spotted antbirds, and then do a playback experiment. The playback experiment has two treatments. One would be an allopatric treatment. We'd broadcast song of its allopatric relative, and then measure its behavioral response. This is what our speakers look like. And the key question here is, does the territorial bird discriminate against the allopatric song? And we measured discrimination by if they ignored the allopatric song, more specifically if they failed to approach the speaker in response to the broadcast song. Failure to approach the speaker means that they're really not very interested in that song. They don't recognize it as conspecific, something to mount an aggressive response to. The second treatment was the sympatric treatment, and we alternated the order of these treatments. This is a sympatric treatment to verify that the bird in question was in fact defending a territory. We expect the bird to get pissed off when we play a song from its local population, and they do. They approach the speaker. So again, our data set is 87 of these taxon pairs, 52 song learners, 35 innate song. We did these experiments on average of 12 territories per taxon pair. And then came up with a song discrimination metric for each taxon pair that ranges from 0 to 1. This is the proportion of territories that totally ignored, by failing to approach the speaker, totally ignored the allopatric song broadcast. So a song discrimination score of 0.8 would mean that 80% of territories discriminated against that allopatric song. That would be a pretty high level of premating reproductive isolation. Then we went to GenBank and were able to find homologous mitochondrial DNA sequences for 76 of the 87 taxon pairs and calculate the uncorrected p distance as a proxy for genetic distance between the taxon pairs. Thus, we can place each of those 76 taxon pairs on a plot of song discrimination against genetic distance. So more closely related species are going to be on the left of this plot, more distantly related species on the right. And again, high levels of song discrimination as their proxy for high levels of premating reproductive isolation based off voice. And this is important because the various hypotheses make different predictions about what the points on this plot should look like. The null hypothesis says that it shouldn't matter whether you're a song learner or not. You have essentially the same evolutionary relationship, same evolution of song discrimination. So one curve will best fit the data. Alternative hypothesis is that it does matter whether you're a sub-Austrian or an Austrian, and that two curves should best fit the data. Either song learners evolve song discrimination faster, or the reverse. When we plot our data, it looks like this. It's rather messy, but we can fit a curve to this. These are Michaelis-Menten two-parameter curve. It has to go through the origin because at a genetic distance of 0, there's that same population. By definition, with our methods, there's no song discrimination. And then when we color code, however, by whether these are sub-Austrians or Austrians, you can start to see with your eye, and the statistics verify, that this more complicated model that fits two curves is a big statistical improvement. And these sub-Austrians actually evolve faster rates of song discrimination compared to Austrians. Sub-Austrians, again, the innate song. So supporting this hypothesis. So the main conclusion here is that there's faster evolution of song discrimination, which again is a reasonable proxy for premating reproductive isolation in voice, in sub-Austenes that have innate song compared to Austene songbirds that have the learned song. And to kind of think a little bit more about what's going on, because again, everything today is focused on the reverse possibility. But I think what's going on is that these sub-Austenes, they have an innate song, and I think that their song recognition is also probably more innate, less learning component to that. And there's less, I believe there's less individual variation in these sub-Austene song learners. So you can see that this is a plot of the frequency of sub-Austenes with song discrimination, and it's bimodal. So these sub-Austenes that we studied, they either had high levels of song discrimination, which means they were very consistent territory to territory in ignoring that allopatric stimuli, or they had low levels of song discrimination. They were very consistent in responding. And it's a very different pattern for the Austene songbirds that have a more uniform distribution. So this bimodal distribution in sub-Austenes, I think, reflects that there's less individual variation in sub-Austenes in their perception and discrimination abilities, which means that at a population level, I think we have finer discrimination abilities. But I think the most plausible explanation of what's going on is that for the innate song species populations, even relatively minor divergence in the songs they produce, that can be sufficient so they can discriminate against those other signals. A couple of consequences to leave you with is that I think the song learners have this extraordinary diversity, but it's unlikely to be due to faster song evolution in allopatry, at least based off this data set, which again is a very large data set. And also it makes me think about the role of premating reproductive isolation in voice in the speciation process in birds. Because we know that the song learners are 4 times as diverse as sub-Austenes, the innate songs. They've been around for the same amount of time. And if what I've shown you is in fact true, it suggests that premating reproductive isolation is not the rate-limiting step in speciation in these passerine birds. So I'd like to thank funders, people that have helped out, put up this graph, and take any questions. Thank you. So it's a great question that obviously birds aren't making mating decisions based solely off voice. I think, yeah, 100% plumage is going to be an important factor. For these tropical birds, the voice, we have good reason to think that voice is really important and perhaps more important in a lot of cases. A lot of these taxon pairs, at least to human eyes, look essentially identical, not the one I showed you. But I'm sure that's at least somewhat important. In an ideal world, you would do like crosses of sympatric song and a sympatric mount that has the correct plumage, et cetera, et cetera. Good question. Yeah.
With your sub-Austenes, you get bimodal distribution in the presentation. Is there any indication that that's actually like phylogenetically meaningful? I mean,
yeah, the question was, does that represent 2 different groups? And the answer is no.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the genetics can spread throughout it.
Right, yeah. There's several groups of sub-Austenes, and there's